What's good, y'all? And welcome back to another preseason preview video. In today's video, we're going over the Golden State Warriors. In case this is your first preseason preview video of mine that you're seeing, basically what I do is go over the offseason, give a little recap there, and then try to look into the future and see what we can expect in this upcoming season. I'm making videos on all 30 NBA teams, and I am almost done, so make sure you check out the channel for the ones that I already uploaded, and then make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the ones coming out going forward. But let's just get right into it and start talking about the Golden State Warriors. Last year was a very up and down season for them, to say the least. They ended up as the 7th seed in the Western Conference, going 48-34. They started off the season really hot. They were really cruising, one of the top seeds. Then they hit a little bit of a low point. They had those talks about if they needed to make a move for another star. They, of course, did make that trade for Jimmy Butler, got back on track, started winning a bunch more. They won their play-in tournament game to make the playoffs as the 7th seed. They even upset the 2nd-seeded Houston Rockets in 7 games before ultimately falling to the Timberwolves in 5 games. Steph Curry did get hurt in that Timberwolves series, so you never really know what could have happened if he stayed healthy. Regardless, though, this is going to be the first full season of Jimmy Butler on the Warriors with Steph Curry and the rest of these guys. And the real question is, can the Warriors squeeze one more championship out of the Steph Curry era? And let's just jump into the offseason that the Warriors had. There is one main guy that kind of held up a lot of these moves for the Warriors, and we will definitely get to him and his whole contract situation. But before we talk about the guys that are coming to the Warriors, I do want to highlight some of the key losses that they had. And since they made a lot of their roster movement mid-season, trading for Jimmy Butler, it really wasn't a lot of losses in the actual offseason. There was one key guy, though, and that is, of course, Kevon Looney. He signed a contract with the New Orleans Pelicans this offseason. And this loss might hurt a few Golden State fans because it seems like Kevon has been here just forever at this point. He got drafted here. He won championships here. He was just exactly whatever the Warriors needed him to be, whether that was starting, coming off the bench, just being that dirty work center, defending the paint, being switchable, rebounding the ball, rolling. I always thought that Kevon Looney was pretty underrated for how well he operated in this Warriors system, and it does suck to see him go. But when we get to the guys that are actually coming to the Golden State Warriors this offseason, they did address the center position, so I guess it kind of makes sense for Kevon to be going somewhere else. And that's a pretty easy segue into the additions that the Warriors made this offseason. Before I get to the center replacement for Kevon Looney, I do want to talk about the guy that held up the Warriors' entire offseason, and that is, of course, Jonathan Kuminga. In case you guys don't follow me on Twitter, it's in the description right now if you don't. But if you guys don't, you would have missed the fact that I have been pretty critical on the Warriors, just making little jokes at them because it reached super late into the offseason. We passed the fall equinox, which is late September. We almost got to October before the Warriors made a single offseason move. Not a trade, not a signing, nothing. They didn't do anything almost this entire summer because Jonathan Kuminga was holding them up and they couldn't get a contract agreement between the two of them. And I don't want it to seem like I'm blaming Jonathan Kuminga. I really think that both sides just could have handled this situation way better. But they ultimately did end up finding an agreement for Jonathan Kuminga to re-sign here with the Warriors. It ended up being a 2-year, $48.5 million deal. The second year is a team option, but from everything that's reported, the intent is next offseason, the Warriors will decline the team option and then they can renegotiate a new contract from there. Ultimately, Jonathan Kuminga will be making about $24 million a year on this contract as it's currently constructed. There was talks about him just signing the qualifying offer, which is a 1-year, $8 million contract. But if he would have accepted that, there would have been a no trade clause on that contract. There was also talks about him getting a souped up qualifying offer where it was a little bit more expensive than that $8 million, but there wasn't a no trade clause on there, so the Warriors could shop him at the trade deadline if needed. Ultimately, they ended up going with this deal. I don't know specifically about the Jonathan Kuminga Warriors relationship, but I do know that these restricted free agent stalemates really can mess up the entire relationship between player and organization. Obviously, Jonathan Kuminga did sign this contract, and he is getting paid $20+ million this year, so I would assume he's somewhat happy, even though it wasn't the exact contract he wanted. A really bad way that this could have played out is exactly what happened with the Nets and Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas ended up signing that qualifying offer. It's almost guaranteed that Cam Thomas will not be re-signing with the Brooklyn Nets next offseason, and you would definitely want to avoid a situation like that with Jonathan Kuminga. Luckily for the Warriors, they do have that team option, so they control Jonathan Kuminga a little bit more than what could have been. So if it does boil down to that and Jonathan Kuminga really does not want to be here, whatever the rift in the relationship is, they would be able to trade him and still get something of value back. And although the Jonathan Kuminga negotiations really delayed a lot of the Warriors' offseason moves, luckily for them, it did not stop them completely. They were still able to sign some free agents. And the number one free agent that I think will be most important to the Warriors this offseason is, of course, Al Horford. He signed a 2-year, $11.5 million deal. That second year is a player option, though, so he'll be making a little less than $6 million a year. And although Al Horford is one of the oldest players in the league at this point, I do think that he essentially is the perfect center for the Warriors and their system. He reminds me a lot of Draymond Green, and I think that they'll be using him a lot like Draymond Green, defensively at least. I do think that Draymond is still a way higher than an Al Horford, but when I say that, I mean that Al Horford is pretty switchable and he gives them size, which are two things that are very important defensively for the Warriors. I mentioned Draymond Green, like they use him a lot as a small ball center because of his ability to switch out while still having size enough to guard other bigs. Al Horford does that, but to a lesser degree. It still is pretty cool that they now have two players that can do this. And then offensively, even though I think Al Horford is a pretty solid passer from the center position, he is nowhere near Draymond Green. Luckily for the Warriors, though, he brings a different element to his offense, and that is, of course, his three-point shooting. He's been one of the best three-point shooting centers in the league for a while now. A long portion of his career, he's been able to knock down the three-point ball. So him bringing that to this Warrior system where they just spread the ball, passing, I really do like him offensively and defensively for this team. Of course, he is 39 years old and on the decline, so, if they would have made the signing 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been even better. But I still do really like this signing for the Warriors. They also are bringing in Seth Curry, of course the brother of Stephen Curry. He signed a non-guaranteed veteran minimum contract, and the word around the league is the Warriors will waive Seth Curry before the start of the season because of salary cap reasons, and then after a few weeks or months, I'm not sure the exact timeline, but they will re-sign Seth Curry mid-season, so his contract is smaller. They will able to sign him for the rest of the season from there without going over the second apron, and everything will be good. So for you Seth Curry fans, once you see that he gets waived, do not panic. He still is planned on re-signing halfway through the season. And whether you think this is a Thanasis Antetokounmpo type of signing, or if they are actually signing Seth Curry for his three-point shooting, I'm not sure. I don't think Seth is going to get a lot of playtime here with the Warriors. Regardless, though, I do think it's pretty cool that the brothers are finally playing together. And if you thought the Seth Curry contract situation was weird, just wait till you hear this next one. De'Anthony Melton is signing a contract here with the Warriors. He's signing a 2-year, $6.5 million deal, so it's basically a 2-year veteran minimum contract. The reason I say this is a weird contract situation, though, is, of course, De'Anthony Melton was signed to the Warriors last year. He played a few games with them before hurting his back. Then he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets in the Dennis Schroeder trade. He played the rest of his year out there, or didn't even play because he was hurt, but you get what I'm saying. He finished the season in Brooklyn, and now he is re-signing back here with the Warriors, even though they traded him away. It's not often that you see a player get traded and then this next offseason re-sign to the team that traded him, so I thought that was kind of funny. But luckily for the Warriors and for De'Anthony Melton, he is fully healthy coming into this season, so he could be another guard in their depth chart. And I like De'Anthony here for the Warriors because he is a defensive-oriented guard. I really like that aspect of it. But then he's also able to knock down the three-point ball, be a little bit of a playmaker as well, and just kind of be a solid backup guard for this team. And last but not least, even though this technically isn't an addition, they did re-sign one of their own free agents, and that is Gary Payton II. They re-signed him to a 1-year veteran minimum contract. And now that we recap the offseason for the Warriors, let's take a look at a potential rotation we could be seeing. In the starting lineup, we have Steph Curry, Moses Moody, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Al Horford. And then off the bench, we have De'Anthony Melton, Brandon Podziemski, Nowitzki, Buddy Hield, Jonathan Kuminga, and Quentin Post. If you guys watched the Miami Heat preseason preview video, in that video I mentioned that Erik Spoelstra is one of the better coaches in the NBA at using his entire team, not only using a 10-man rotation, but allowing the 11th, 12th, 13th man to get some real minutes throughout the season. If Erik Spoelstra is the best, Steve Kerr is right up there with him at being able to use his entire bench. So before we talk about this team overall, there are some guys that didn't make this rotation for me that I definitely think the Warriors will be giving a decent amount of playing time to. So I want to just give them some quick shout outs. Starting off with Trayce Jackson-Davis. He started a decent amount of games for the Warriors last year and has been a really good center for them since he got drafted. Even, his rookie season, he came in being impactful. I mentioned that Kevon Looney signed a new contract and he won't be here in Golden State. They did bring in Al Horford to help with that. But besides Al and Quentin Post, I definitely think that Trayce Jackson-Davis will be a part of this three-headed center rotation. I mentioned Al Horford being 39 years old. I doubt he's going to be playing every game, back-to-backs. He'll probably sit. Maybe he'll just miss a chunk of season here or there. I definitely have faith in Trayce Jackson-Davis to step in and be an athletic, mobile big where he can, set those picks, roll hard to the basket, be switchable on defense. He brings a lot of things that I like to the court. Or depending on matchups, I can even see him just taking the backup center spot away from Quentin Post if they needed a more mobile big, someone to be more of an interior presence instead of a stretch guy like Quentin Post usually brings. Also, Gary Payton will definitely be getting some burn for the Warriors this year. He is just the perfect piece for the Warriors. I know he won the championship here, then he went to Portland and wasn't as productive, came right back to the Warriors and was looking like the player that he once was. I think that is because he literally is the perfect puzzle piece for this Warrior system, minus the three-point shot because we know he can't really knock that down. But being a 6'2", power forward essentially, where he's a screener, he's a roller, he'll sit in the dunker spot, he'll pass off the short roll, he'll cut, he'll compete defensively and be very versatile in that aspect. Again, besides the three-point shot, he does everything the Warriors could want from a player in this system, so he definitely will be getting some type of play. And then last but not least, out of the notable reserves, we do have Guy Santos as well. Kind of similar to the Gary Payton aspect in certain ways, just because I really like him as a connector in this Warrior system. Whether that's him just making the right pass and keeping the ball movement going, he can actually knock down a three-point shot at a decent clip. He has good length, being 6'8". This is a pretty small Warriors team, so having some of those bigger wing guys definitely is super beneficial to them. I really like Santos as just a cutter as well. Again, just a very smart, cerebral player that fits this Warrior system almost to a T. And I guess to just go a little bit further into that Warrior system and how this roster fits it, I do think that this team is going to be one of the better defenses in the NBA still. The fact that they have a starting lineup of essentially 4+ defenders, and then Steph Curry, who has improved a lot over his career. He's not a negative defender, but I wouldn't classify him as a positive defender just yet. Regardless, though, they have 4 positive defenders and a net even defender in their starting lineup. I really like that aspect of it. And it's not only that they have these positive defenders, but they have loads of really versatile defenders. Of course, it all starts with Draymond Green being the backline of this all. Essentially the quarterback of their defense. I know that term has been used for Draymond before. But him leading by example of being super physical, super versatile, never backing down from any matchup. I think that is a big part of it. And then also the guy that they brought in last trade deadline, Jimmy Butler, essentially is like a perimeter-centric Draymond Green in certain ways, where he obviously has more of the body of a wing and, more of a perimeter defender, but still very switchable, very rangy, very physical, a great defensive playmaker, forcing those turnovers and stuff. Have those two guys a part of your big three and be two of your most impactful defenders, I think that goes a long way. But it doesn't just stop there. I mentioned Al Horford. They brought him in and all of the versatility that he brings at the center position. But then also Moses Moody, who has come out as one of the better perimeter defenders in the league. Being that backcourt mate next to Steph Curry definitely helps that dynamic go. But then it doesn't stop there, though, because off the bench they have plenty of more rangy, versatile defenders like DeAnthony Melton. Brandon Podziemski is pretty solid. He'll compete. Jonathan Kuminga, I don't look at him as a defender, but his athleticism allows him to make a lot of plays along with the 6'8" frame that he has. The Warriors always seem to just be playing defense on a string where this guy knows if I have to help up over here, then he has to move up, which means this guy moves to rotate over there, and they just kind of go all around, and it allows them to play this super aggressive type of defense and allows them to then make these defensive plays like forcing a turnover, blocking a shot, forcing an air ball, and then pushing the tempo. It really allows them to then get easy offense going. And speaking of offense, I do think that that's where this Warriors team is going to not necessarily struggle, but maybe struggle more compared to their defense. I have a lot of faith in them defensively. Offensively, though, of course, they have Steph Curry, who still is one of the best players in the league. His three-point shooting is something we have never seen before. I don't really need to talk about how great Steph Curry is and what he does offensively for the Warriors. Where I really am concerned about is the creation outside of that. Obviously, they brought in Jimmy Butler to help with that, and of course, he does do that, creating his own shot, getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line, even playmaking himself. Of course, the playmaking of Draymond Green as well. But they don't have anyone else that really creates their shot. Obviously, they look at Jonathan Kuminga as a guy off their bench that could create their own shot, and he definitely can do that, getting to the rim and the free throw line as well, like Jimmy Butler. And I do like that aspect of his game. I just don't know if I like the fact that he essentially is their third best creator. Outside of Steph Curry, outside of Jimmy Butler, I would probably say Jonathan Kuminga is their third best creator. And on a championship level team with that type of aspirations, I just feel like that's a pretty big fall off from your top two guys to then your third guy. And of course, the Warriors system isn't solely based off of creation. I would argue that they probably have one of the better offensive systems to negate the lack of creation. They a lot of times are able to manufacture these advantages offensively instead of where most teams just kind of force one guy to make a play to get that offensive advantage. For example, the Warriors will have Draymond just do a DHO top of the key. That gives their ball handler an advantage just getting downhill, and then from there they can, floater, lay, kick it out to the corner, swing pass, and, get into their action from there. So I don't think that it's going to be like detrimental. I do think that if I'm nitpicking though and seeing their weakest aspect, it's definitely their self-creation. And then outside of that, the most obvious weakness to this team is their age. I think it's their first time in NBA history that a team is starting 4 or more 35-plus-year-olds. That is, of course, Al Horford, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Stephen Curry. All of these guys are 35 or above, and, later in those, some of these guys are 39, 37, 36. So that is some type of concern. I mentioned when I was talking about the Clippers in their video that I'm not necessarily one of those guys to say, you're too old, you're not a contender. I'm not going to that extreme. It definitely is something to worry about, though, considering the wear and tear that all of these players go throughout an 82-game series. And now it is time for my ceiling, floor, and expectation for the Golden State Warriors. Starting off with their ceiling, I could see them being as high as the 6th seed. I'm very confident in saying the Warriors are not a Tier 1 team in the Western Conference this year. If you guys are new to these videos, my Tier 1 is pretty much, in no order. The OKC Thunder, the Denver Nuggets. I did have the Rockets in there, but now after the Fred VanVleet trade or injury, I don't really know exactly if they're still in there. The Clippers I could throw in there. I'm very confident in saying that the Warriors are not in that tier, but I do think that they could be towards the top of the tier right below them. And notice I said could be because obviously I want to give them their respect. They still have Steph Curry. I do really like Jimmy Butler and what he brings to this team. The age is a little bit of a concern, and then again, the offense is a little bit of a concern. I could see this team going through some, pretty sluggish dry spells. Obviously, when you have Steph Curry, he can snap you out of that in an instant, so I'm not putting too much of it on there. But regardless, I do think that that's enough to hold them out of that top tier for me. And then when you talk about playoffs, I do really like this Warriors team, and it's not a hot take to say that they are one of the most dangerous teams when it comes to the playoffs. They have the experience, they have the star power, they have the defense, so I do think that at their ceiling, they would definitely be able to win a upset in the first round, even though they would be the 6th seed in this situation. When it comes to that second round, though, that's where things get a little bit more murky. I do think that at their ceiling, they are a second round exit. When you talk about their floor, I see them as low as the 9th seed, and in the play-in tournament, I still do respect this Warriors team and think that they are a lock for a postseason debut, whether that is the play-in tournament or just the straight up playoffs. I think that they can do one of those things. And in a winner-go-home situation, I don't know if there's many players in the league I would take over Steph Curry. That being said, though, winning 2 play-in tournament games, we have seen Steph Curry not even be able to do that. It is very difficult to do, to go from that bottom bracket of the play-in tournament into the playoffs. So at their floor, I do see them as play-in losers. Then when you talk about my expectations for them, I expect them to be around that 8th seed and in the play-in tournament. I do think that they are going to be a solid regular season team. They get way more dangerous once you get to that postseason. And being the 8th seed, I definitely think that they could win one of their 2 play-in games to make the playoffs. At that point, though, I don't know if they could pull off the upset versus the 1st or 2nd seed, so I'm expecting them to be a tough first-round exit. What do you guys think, though? Let me know in the comments below where you think the Warriors will end in this year's standings, and how far will they make it in the postseason. They're one of the more interesting Western Conference teams, in my opinion, so I'm interested to see what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social medias, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch y'all.